What's up everybody, I am Key and today I want to make a video about how to get an apartment in New York City. So I recently just moved to New York from Korea and I've lived in Korea for the past 15 years. So getting an apartment in New York was actually not that easy of a process. There were a lot of things that I had to learn for the first time. However, within about a week of house searching, I was able to get a house, which now having lived for over a month, I'm very satisfied. And I was able to get it without the help of an agent. All by myself along with my girlfriend Claire. So today, I just want to sum up what I learned throughout the process of getting this apartment and pass that on to you for free. If you're one of those 1%ers that money is not an issue when you are set for life, then using an agent will be very helpful. It'll make your life easier. However, for the rest of us 99%ers, you want to save that extra brokerage fee. I mean, that can come up to about $3,000. And who's got time to be spending $3,000? I don't. So today's video is going to be focused on how to get an apartment by yourself without going through an agent. Be a man. So first, I want to begin by explaining a few concepts to you, because these concepts, although they may be very well known to Americans who've lived in America their whole life, for anybody that's coming from outside of America, these are the first concepts that you need to understand. So the first concept is the difference between an apartment and a condo. So what an apartment is that it's a bunch of houses in a building that's all owned by one company. So basically the landlord is the company and the company is leasing out the rooms to each individual tenant. On the other hand, a condo is when each house has a different owner. It's all been sold and each house has a different owner and you're actually leasing from that specific owner. So what difference does this make? Well, it actually makes quite a difference. As for condos, you first have to go through a screening process to get approval into that building. So it makes it more tricky and it takes a longer time and they're a bit more picky about who they let into the building. Second of all, if you go into a condo, then it really depends on what owner you get. Some owners can be very helpful and kind to the tenant, whereas some other owners can actually be very difficult to work with. When something's broken, they are not that willing to help. They try to blame it on you. It can be a help. Whereas an apartment, because it's a company and you have employees working there, and overall it's not their personal house that they're dealing with, they tend to be a lot easier to work with. Furthermore, apartments have a leasing office. So if you go to a leasing office, then they can easily show you all of the available units in that apartment right now. Whereas for a condo, it's a bit more difficult to try to look at the available houses. Okay, the next concept I want to explain are the different types of units you get. So you can get a 3-bedroom, meaning there are 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom, and then you can get a studio. Studio means that you don't have a separate room. So there's no separate bedroom apart from the living room. So there's just one room that you can put a bed in, you can put a table in, but it's just overall one room. So that's the basic category of units. Studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, or 3 bedroom. However, a nice little tip I want to give you is, if you can't afford a 1 bedroom in New York City, which many people can't, and you want to go to a studio, however, you do want a little bit of differentiation within your house between your living space and then your sleeping space, there's this thing called the alcove studio. Alcove. When I first heard it, I was also like, what the? They also call it a home office studio. So what it means is that it's a studio. It doesn't have a separate bedroom, but the structure of that room is such that you kind of can have a closed off area within that studio that you can use as a bedroom. So I'm currently living in an alcove studio, and you know what? It works out perfectly. I'm very glad that I got this alcove studio. I mean, this same apartment with as a 1 bedroom would have been way more expensive, but I got what I wanted, a separate sleeping space. And the third concept I want to explain to you is a luxury apartment. So when people hear luxury apartment, they think that it's going to be some very ultra extravagant, expensive place. However, it's not necessarily like that. What they mean by a luxury apartment is that it's an apartment that has amenities. It has elevators, it has a lobby, it has a 24-hour concierge, it may have a pool, it may have a gym, it may have a rooftop. Overall, they tend to be very newly built. So if you can't afford it, I very strongly advise you to check out the luxury apartments, because I think that those offer some of the best living spaces within the city. Okay, now that we have the main concepts down, next I want to explain to you how to find apartments. So The simplest way to find apartments is by using services such as StreetEasy, Zumper, and RentTop. These are the newest platforms where there are a lot of available houses that you can see online. It's a very convenient way to start your search. Now, from my experience in Korea, these similar platforms in Korea had a lot of fake advertisements. So basically, a lot of the listings were just like baits where you would see really good deals, but they don't really exist. It's just a way for the agents to get them to call you. And then when you call them, they're like, oh, this place just got off the market, but we have some other places available and they're going to be a bit more expensive. However, in StreetEasy, I noticed that it wasn't that bad. A lot of the listings that we saw were actual listings that existed. And so I think it's a good way to start your search. Now, having said that, I do want to point out that StreetEasy only provided about 30% of the houses we saw. Only 30%. So 70% of the houses that we saw were houses that were not listed on StreetEasy or the other platforms. So what's my personal tip on how to find apartments? This little trick worked wonders for me. Magical. It's to open up Google Map, go to a neighborhood that you may be interested in living in, and type apartments. That's all. And right away, you're going to start seeing all the major apartments in that area. Now, a bunch of those apartments are not going to be listed on StreetEasy. But if you go into their website, you're going to see a tab called Availabilities. That's where you want to click. If you click there, they're going to have a real-time listing of all their available units, most of the times categorized by studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom. And there are many listings out there. I was actually surprised at how many available listings there were out there. So this opened up the options for me to choose from tremendously. So make sure to take advantage of this method. Now, a third method that we used is once we were kind of sure what neighborhood we wanted to live in, we just walked around. Yep. Just going around the streets looking for potential places. Because even in Google Maps, there are apartments that don't show up when you type apartment. But while walking around, you'll see apartments that seem nice and that you may be interested in. And they're oftentimes, if it's an apartment that has available units, they're going to have like a panel outside that says leasing office inside. So even if you don't have an appointment, just go in there, say it's a walk-in, and ask if they have any available units. Actually, the house that I'm living in right now, we got through this method. We used StreetEasy and we used Google Maps, but ultimately, once we found the neighborhood we wanted to live in, we just started walking around and we stumbled upon this apartment that we just walked into the leasing office, said it's a walk-in, and this turned out to be the actual house that we ultimately got. Now, as for using an agent, agents can be very helpful, but they normally charge a 15% of the annual rent fee. 15% is about a month's rent. So if you're living in somewhere that a month's rent is going to be $3,000, then instead of paying $36,000 for the year, you're going to end up paying $40,000. So using that agent is actually going to bump up your budget quite a bit. However, a nice little tip I want to tell you is that when agents show you houses, not every single one of those houses are houses where you need to pay a fee. There are houses where the apartment pays the agent for bringing tenants into them so that you don't have to pay a fee to the agent. So if you are going to use an agent but you can't really afford that agent fee, ask him if they can show you any apartments where you don't have to pay a fee. Alright, so now that I told you how to get an apartment, the next thing I want to tell you is when you're looking at apartments, what to do so you can make the most of each visit. So the first thing you're going to do is set yourself a budget. You want to have a clear idea of how much you can spend in total for the year's worth of rent. This is the budget that includes everything. If you start off with that solid budget, then it's gonna make things a lot easier. Next, you want to decide on what are the essentials that you need to have. Does a house need to be in a certain neighborhood? Does it need a bedroom? Does it need an elevator? These are the things that you want to first of all identify so that you can look at houses that are going to fit that requirement. The more you specify what your requirements are, the more efficient your search is going to be. So what can some of these requirements be? Well, let me give you a list of some of the things that I looked at. When you walk into an apartment, the first thing you're going to see is a square footage. You need to understand how large this is. You'll get a good idea when you walk into the house, but it's always good to to have the square footage and number. You also want to check the finish, how the tiles are. Some can be very antiquated, some can be very modern. You want to check the kitchen, see if the refrigerator is a new stainless steel refrigerator or if it's a bit dated. This is really minor, but I always checked if the freezer has an automatic ice machine. It's just a very personal preference because I'm a wine lover and I use a lot of ice on my ice buckets. You could check the stove, see if it's a gas stove, if it's electric, or if it's one of those coil ones that heat up. Personally, I don't like the coil ones. I'd stick with gas. It's best for cooking. That's another thing that I looked at. It's good to check the thickness of the walls. Make sure that they're not too thin. If you bang against the wall to your next door and you can actually just hear like a hollow ringing, it's probably not good sound insulation. You can even ask what it's made of. See if it's made of concrete, which would be good for sound insulation. You could check if the windows are double paned, which will keep a lot of the outside noise out. You know, Manhattan can be very, very loud. All the honking. There's always like an ambulance going by every 5 minutes in Manhattan. So double pane windows. And finally, in the house, always check if there's a washer and dryer in the unit. Some places have them within your house so that you can do your laundry within your house. Other places have a central one, either on the same floor or even just one for the entire apartment. Now, apart from these things that you can check within the apartment, there are some things that you can check for the whole building, such as if there's a 24-hour concierge. This is really helpful if you're trying to get a delivery, and it just overall feels a lot safer. If there are elevators in the building, imagine having to walk up like 7 flights without an elevator when you're moving in. A lot of newly built apartments are going to have amenities such as pools, gyms, rooftop lounges, and some even had basketball courts and movie rooms. So there are a lot of different amenities that you can check for. Now, 2 questions that I personally ask when I look at houses is, number 1, how many units are in the building? This gives me a good feel of how large or small the community of this building is going to be. Now, which one you prefer is going to be a purely personal choice, but knowing how many units there are is going to give you a good feel for the size of the community. And the second thing I ask is, when was this built? Even if a building seems very new from the outside, it could just be renovated and the building itself be over 100 years old. And when a building is that old, once you're living there, you could notice some inconveniences. So it's just another thing I like to ask. And lastly, you can check around the apartment, around the building, and check out the neighborhood. See if it feels safe. Think about how this neighborhood could be at night. Whether you have a grocery store or a Whole Foods nearby, or a CVS or a Duane Reade. These are some of the last things you want to check when you're looking at each apartment. Now that you know what some of the things are to look for, from all of these different options, you can choose which are the essential requirements that you're going to need and make yourself a nice list of requirements for you. So in this process of looking at apartments, I have 3 tips that I want to give you. My first tip is always take videos of every single apartment you look at. Because in my case, I looked at apartments for about 6 days, and overall I think I looked at over 40 apartments. Now what happens when you do that is, in the beginning, first 1 or 2 days, it's okay. You remember which house was which. But by the 3rd, 4th, and 5th day, everything just starts mixing all together. You don't know if a building A had this, or building B had this, or building C was the one you liked. I mean, when you're looking at each building, it feels like you're going to remember, but you're not going to remember. Trust me. So what you want to do is just take out your phone, start recording, and just record from the moment that you just walk in that house. Record every room, record the kitchen, record out the window, look at the closet, just everywhere. And make sure to say out loud what building this is and what room this is, because even within a building you could look at several rooms. Or you could just leave yourself a memo letting yourself know which video is which building. Just make sure that you can distinguish which is which. So taking videos is the number 1 most important tip when you're going around looking at apartments. Second is, when you find a place that you might like, take out Google Maps, type in the address of your work or your school or wherever it is that you're going to be going to every day, and look at how long it's going to take from the house that you're looking at to your office or to your school. Because in New York City, what matters most is not really the absolute distance between your house and your work. It's how close your house is to a subway station and how close your office is to the subway station. So even if your work and house are not that far, if the amount of walking you need to do to get to the subway station is very long, then it's just going to add a lot of time to your commute. On the other hand, if your house is right by a subway station and your office is right by another subway station, even if the actual physical distance is quite long, your commute could be very short. So always make sure to take out Google Maps and see how long your commute is going to take. And the last tip is, once you find yourself a short list of apartments that you're interested in living in, go into Google Maps. Type the name of that apartment and read the reviews. Now, there was this one apartment that we were really interested in living in, and we were almost finalized in choosing that apartment. But once we read the reviews, we heard that the sound insulation was horrible. You could literally hear the conversation of the next door neighbor, even when they're not like screaming. Just having a normal conversation and you could hear what they're saying. So thankfully, we didn't go to that place. And where we're living in right now, I've never heard my next door neighbor a single day. So make sure you read the reviews because it can be very helpful. Okay, so now that I told you how to find an apartment, the next thing that I want to tell you about is a few things to watch out for, especially when it comes to expense. So the first thing I want to caution you about is the concept of net rent. So what is net rent? Net rent is different from gross rent. Gross rent is going to be the actual price of a place. However, these days, for marketing promotional uses, a lot of apartments are offering a deal where if you rent an apartment for 12 months, then they give you 1 month or even up to 2 months free rent. So basically, if the gross rent is like $3,000 a month, right? So then 12 months worth is supposed to be $36,000. However, if they give you a free month or free 2 months, then it's going to cost you $36,000 for 13 months or 14 months. So in this case, because you're paying $36,000 for 13 or 14 months, then the net rent is, in the case of 13 months for $36,000, it's going to be about $2,700 something per month. And if they give you 2 months free, so it's $36,000 for 14 months, then the net rent of 1 month is going to come down to something like $2,500 something dollars. So the net rent is going to be lower than the gross rent. The gross rent is supposed to be $3,000 per month, but what you're actually paying for the first 13 or 14 months is $2,700 or $2,500. Now, that sounds really good. If your budget was $2,700, then this house is all of a sudden within the realm of your budget. However, you need to be careful of the fact that, yes, the first 13 months you're only going to be paying $2,700, so it is within the range of your budget. However, if you want to stay there another year, then the second year, they don't give you that promotion. So your rent is gonna go up to $3,000 a month, as was your original gross rent. Or it could even go up higher because every year they raise the rent. So this is a marketing promotion that a lot of apartments use so that for your first year, this place is gonna be within your budget. Barely, but within your budget. But then the second year, it goes above your budget and then you're in trouble. You either need to move again, which is a pain in the ass, or you need to pay up more. So anyways, be aware of that net rent concept compared to the gross rent concept. A lot of these apartment buildings, when you go into their website, they're going to list the price, but then you find out later that it's the price of the net rent. So make sure you're looking at the gross rent price. Another concept to be aware of is the concept of rent controlled and rent stabilized. So some buildings in New York are rent controlled. This is the best case scenarios for tenants. So every year in New York, apartment prices go up. However, when an apartment is rent controlled, basically meaning that your rent is not going to go up a lot. So you don't have to worry about how much more you're going to pay on your second year. Now, the next best thing for tenants is to go into a place where it's rent stabilized. Rent stabilized means that the city of New York gives a maximum percentage of increase that an apartment can raise their prices on. So within that maximum range, the apartments are free to raise it however much they want, but they just need to stay within that maximum range. So in that case, your next year's rent could go up a little bit higher than a rent-controlled apartment. And the last type of apartments are apartments that are neither rent-controlled or rent-stabilized. In these apartments, your rent can go up however much the owner wants to raise. So just be aware of that. Also, some hidden costs that are not going to be part of your rent, but they're kind of going to be part of your rent are, for example, the utility fees that you're going to have to pay. So most of the apartments that we saw, the heat, water, and gas were included, but electricity was most of the times not included. And also you're going to have to get internet and cable by yourself. So these are going to be extra fees that are going to be added on to your monthly rental. Also, if your apartment has amenities, then most of the apartments with amenities charge you extra if you want to use their gym or if you want to be a club member to use their pool or stuff like that. So you're going to want to take that fee into account as well. There was was this one case where we found an apartment that we really liked. The unit could have been one of our finalists. However, they charged like $100 for each person living in the unit. So it was going to be $200 extra every month to use their gym and pool. So we ultimately decided to pass on that apartment. Also, if you have a car or if you have any pets, there could also be additional fees. So make sure to check about those additional fees as well. And the last additional fee that you will most likely have is when you're finally applying for the apartment, there's going to be an application fee and there's also going to be a security deposit. I think the application fee is about $100 or something, and then the security deposit is normally about a month's rent. So take these fees into consideration when you're trying to plan out your expenses. Okay, so now you found an apartment that you want to live in. You finalized on this apartment and you want to move forward with signing the lease. So what are the processes for actually leasing the apartment? Well, the process these days is actually quite simple. Most of the apartments that we looked at, you could file the application online and they would then send you the lease online through DocuSign or something like that, where you could actually just sign the lease on your computer. So a lot of the things are done digitally these days so that you may never have to go back to the leasing office again after your first visit. Now, when you apply, you're going to provide your personal information. So what they're going to do is once they get your application, they're going to run a credit check on your credit history. And when they run the credit check, a lot of places charge you for that credit check as well. And when they check your credit score, they're also going to check if your yearly income is at least 40 times the monthly rent of your apartment. So if you're making more than 40 times the monthly rent, you're fine. If not, it could be a little bit more complicated. And within a matter of a couple days, you're going to be ready to move in. So the process is actually quite simple and a lot of it is done digitally. Now, the next part I want to talk about is how to get an apartment when you're coming from outside of the United States as an international person. So as I told you, I moved here from South Korea. I've been living in South Korea for the past 15 years. So I currently have no credit history in the United States. So here I want to talk to international people moving to New York City and what the requirements are for foreigners when they're trying to get an apartment. So the first thing I want to start off with is by saying that every single apartment that I saw, there was a way for a foreigner with no credit history to lease the apartment. Every single one. So don't worry too much even if you don't have credit. You know, when I first came, people told me, oh, you don't have credit, it's gonna be complicated, it's gonna be a nightmare. No, it really wasn't. It's not that big of a deal. Basically, as a foreigner, you have 4 options when you're trying to lease an apartment. The first option is the most simple. It's just paying up front. You're gonna be paying for about 6 months rent up to a year's rent in advance. Now, I tried asking a lot of places if they would take 3 months in advance. No. The minimum that I was able to get was 6 months in advance. And a lot of places asked for the entire year in advance as well. So that's the most simple way of going about it if you're a foreigner, just paying it up front as long as you have the cash available to do so. Now, the second option is a little bit better of an option, but not a lot of places offer this. It's just a bit of an increased security deposit. So I told you that in America, they ask you for about 1 month's rent as a security deposit. This is separate from your first month's rent. It's a security deposit that they're going to keep until the day that you move back out. Now, there are some places where if you're a foreigner and you have no credit history, then they'll just ask you for about a 3 months rent worth of security deposit, or maybe a little bit larger. But anyways, just a slightly increased security deposit and everything else is the same. So I think that that's actually a really good option for you if they do provide it. And now a third option that a lot of places take is the concept of a guarantor. Now what a guarantor is a person that's going to vouch for you and say, yes, he's going to pay his rent, and if for whatever reason he decides not to pay his rent, then I'll take responsibility and pay for him. So it's a person who's going to back you in a sense. But the requirement for this guarantor is that this guarantor is going to have to be a person that makes annually more than 80 times the monthly rent of your apartment. So if you have a wealthy friend or relative that can help you in that way, then that can also be a way for you to get an apartment. Now, the guarantor has to be in America, whether an American or a green card holder, but they have to be in America. And now the last option that a lot of apartments give for international is to use a guarantor company. So basically, a guarantor company is going to be a company that serves as a guarantor for you and takes a certain fee for providing the guarantor service for you. So it's going to be the same as getting yourself a personal guarantor, except it's a company and you're going to be paying them a fee. Now the fee is normally going to be around the same as a 1 month's rent. So again, if you're moving into an apartment where they only take the guarantor companies, then you're going to have to add another month's worth of rent to your yearly expenses. So I think two of the largest guarantor companies in New York City is the guarantor and insurance. And so these are the major companies that you can use. These are the 4 ways that an international person moving to New York City can lease a house without any credit history. Not that complicated, quite simple. Don't get scared. You can do it. Anything is possible. Sky is the limit. Oh, and one more thing. Some places, even if you're a foreigner and you have no credit history, they still only take 1 month's security deposit. They don't differentiate you with a person with a long time credit history. It's the same. There's no other difference. It's like they're an angel. And what they say is, oh, we're actually not trying to see if you had good credit. We're just trying to see if you have very bad credit and you maybe have not paid your previous, rent for a year or something like that. So if you're moving here and you have no credit, it's not bad credit, so we can take you. Now, the apartment that I'm living in right now is actually one of those very, very special but uncommon cases where actually it was very easy to move in and I didn't need any of those other things. So if you're very lucky and God wants to help you out because you've accrued a lot of good karma and you recently called your parents, then there are such apartments out there as well. Okay, so these are the major things that you want to look out for when you're getting an apartment in New York City. I know that for many of you out there, the number 1 problem is the money. Yes, New York rent is very expensive. A lot of studios start at about $3,000 to $3,500 a month. A lot of 1-bedrooms start at $4,000. So yes, New York City does break your back. However, if you're trying to live in New York City in a budget, then there are about 3 options that you can consider. The first thing you can consider is getting a roommate. There are services like Roomster out there or even Craigslist where you can find other roommates. And a lot of the apartments that I saw were very open to you just creating another room in an otherwise studio. So you could put up a wall. I think they called it a flex wall. And it costs about a few $1,000s to put up. And you can make your own little wall and make your own little bedroom. So surprisingly, a lot of the buildings were open to that. Another thing you can do is try to get an apartment at times of the year where there are not so many people searching for apartments. Because New York City real estate also follows the supply and demand curve, the times of the year when there are not a lot of people moving are the times when you can get the best deals. Mostly winter. And finally, location. If you want to live in Manhattan, especially a good neighborhood, then you're going to have to pay a lot. So the further you get from that location, it takes a little bit more time to get to downtown, but it gradually starts getting cheaper. So you might want to look at Brooklyn. Or on the other side, you might want to look at Jersey City. So I temporarily stayed for a week in Jersey City when I first came to New York and I was apartment hunting. And I got to tell you, I was actually very, very pleasantly surprised at Jersey City. I stayed at Newport and it's really easy to get to the city. It's just, you take the path and it just takes you directly. I think it was literally just one subway station away. The path runs 24 hours a day and it has a much more of a calm, peaceful feeling than Manhattan. So if you have children or something, then that could be a better place than living within Manhattan. Okay, so next, I can't end this video without telling you a very, very important warning. I gotta tell you about the scammers while you're house searching. So if you're going to use services like StreetEasy or Roomster to get a roommate, be very careful of scammers. There are many out there. My friend is actually in the process of moving to New York right now, and she was very recently just contacted by a scammer and could have led to an unfortunate situation. So a lot of time for scammers, they're going to post a listing that seems like a very, very good deal. Or if you post a posting on those sites saying that you're looking for an apartment, then they might contact you first. So in those cases, how do you know if it's a scam or not? Well, the first thing is broken grammar. A lot of those people say that they've lived in America their whole life, but the grammar of their posting is just wrong, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. However, the moment that you know more concretely that this is a scam is when they send over a contract for you, kind of ask you to sign it before you've seen the house and maybe even pay up the security deposit first, even before seeing the house. Now that's what I call royal bullshit. Never ever pay any type of security deposit or even sign a contract before you actually look at the listing. Just don't do it. And the most definitive proof that you can get that this is a scam is if they have like a US number written there, then call that US number. Very rarely are scammers actually going to pick up. What's going to happen is that after a few times of ringing, you're going to hear like an automatic response. And there, you're going to hear the word text now. Something like, thank you for calling this text now number. Now, text now is an app that allows you to kind of change your phone number so that it seems like you have a US number when actually you're not in the US. So the moment you hear the text now in the automatic response, then you know it's a scam. So please make sure that you watch out for these scams. And finally, as a final little tip for you when you're moving in is that most of the houses in New York City are unfurnished when you first go in. So you're gonna have to buy everything, the bed, table, lamps, a lot of things. The first thing I did was become a member of Amazon Prime, and I basically just ordered everything I needed through Amazon. It's just the best and easiest way to furnish your apartment, and everything is just magically delivered to you. I also used Home Depot for some of the furnitures, and that's basically how I furnished the entire place. So with that, this has been my personal experience of getting an apartment in New York City. It seems like it's gonna be really hard, but it's not that difficult once you actually know how to do it. And I gotta tell you, I'm really happy with the apartment that I got. I'm loving New York City. I hope you will as well. If this video has been helpful, make sure to click like and subscribe for more videos. And make sure to enjoy and appreciate your life. I am Kide, and thanks for watching. Peace! 나는 너의 알라딘 아니야 지켜주는 알라신도 아니야 그저 혼자 가만히 기다리던 GENIE 인형 바로